This little lesson is just chock full of fun stuff. For instance, first of all, how to make a really nice clean wash. Number 2, using Kleenex to make clouds really quickly and what kind of paint to use in order to make that lift really well. Using a candle, a utility candle, to bring out the highlights in the background of the ocean. How to use wet on wet to make a really nice ocean look without a lot of trouble. Why you would use tracing paper to do your drawings, and then of course what kind of transfer paper to use to get it back onto your watercolor paper. The use of the reason why you really want some value changes in your painting and how to accomplish it very easily. We'll be using burnt sienna, French ultramarine, permanent sap green, raw sienna, and phthalo blue. I think you'll like this one. This is a step-by-step guide as to how to do this, and we'll just follow this along. You can find this step-by-step guide as an attachment to this very same lesson on my Patreon channel. No ads, of course. If you have a moment to stop by and register, even at one of the beginner levels, it would really help me continue this journey of sharing watercolor lessons with you. It would mean a lot to see you there. Give that a try. It's at patreon.com/BarbaraSparks. Okay, so step by step, first thing you do is draw a very narrow figure 8 on your paper. Let's make that a little bit bigger. And with the trusty kneaded eraser that I can pinch down like this, make it real small, I can take out that little tiny line so easily. All right, next, from this top part here, just draw a straight line, a curved line through here. Next, in the back, draw a little curvy line like that. And next, bring it down like this and draw a line up to here. The next thing you do is erase these lines in here. And you have your little boat. Isn't it wonderful? Now, you might also want to have a little seat for the guy. Whoop. There we go. So, now I have drawn the boat. All I have to do is put it on the painting. In this painting, I had the horizon line at about halfway up, and that basically is pretty much of a no-no. You really want to have it at least, maybe 3/8 up or 5/8 up. That's the golden mean. So what we're going to do is do the horizon line at about 3/8 up. And one of the reasons that I want to do that is so that I have lots of room to do awesome clouds up in the sky. All right. And then on top of that, I'll do the little island here with some trees. An odd number, right? 2 trees, 3 trees. Doesn't really matter too much. And then down here, I will put in the shore. Now, many classical artists will never have the same exit line on both sides. This, because it's a horizon line, is unusual. But usually you'll see in still lifes and everything else, they're never straight across. So we're going to do this quite lightly because the boat's going to be right here. So the exit line is a little bit further down than the entry line. Okay, so that's all that has. And then I need to put my boat in here somewhere. So how far down do I put the boat? How much into the sand do I put the boat? And I'm thinking that that works pretty well right there. So I'm going to tape that right there. And put some transfer paper in between my drawing and the watercolor paper. This is Saral transfer paper, and it's listed in the notes below. My favorite pen to use for transferring is, this is a round stick grip, very cheap, but it's got just a perfect point for this kind of thing. And I'm thinking this will not be really easy for you all to see, but it's so fast. I'm just going to come up and follow the lines of this little boat. Little seat here, and I think I'm done. Yeah, so there I have it, my guides for my painting. I noticed that both sides of my island are about the same shape. That doesn't work, so let's just make one a little bit larger and this one perhaps a little bit smaller. Again, using this marvelous eraser to get rid of some of the lines I didn't need. And let's make this a little bit less even. Okay. So the question is where to start, and I think what I'll do is I'll just use this wax crayon. You can use a candle and put in some of these reflections. I'm going to lay it down on the paper and just gently hit the tops of the paper. This is a 140-pound cold press, and it's a little bit rough, so that's just perfect for this kind of work. And I'm not going to bring it all the way forward, although I think I'll bring it a little bit more forward than that. All right. Trouble is you cannot see it, so you have to sort of go by your intuition. A wax candle, utility candle, does just as well as you know, one of these commercial crayons, wax crayons. Larger ones can be cut. And in fact, sometimes people prefer this because they can just go straight over. Now remember, you're going straight across the tops of these things, of these paper. And because this is a flatter edge, some people find it easier. Now also something to know is that wax is not easy to get off. Some people try getting it off with an iron, and maybe that works sometimes, but not all the time. So you have to be prepared that the wax will stay, that part will stay white. So now the fun begins, and for this part I'm going to use Thalo blue, ultramarine blue, and this is a well, it's kind of like a messed up raw sienna. Let's get that a little bit cleaner. And people wonder sometimes where to start when they're painting, and I like to start at the top. Excuse me. And the reason why is because then I don't get my hand in, it's just very practical, I don't get my hand in wet paint. So this is wet on wet, and because it is, I want to get everything ready before I get started, because I want to be sure that I can time the dryingness or the drying cycle as controlled as possible, right? So one of the things I'm going to use is Kleenex, and did you know that if you tear Kleenex vertically, and the way you can tell what vertically is you see where they've stamped it on the side, you'll get a straight line. If you tear it horizontally, well, that's pretty much of a straight line. I don't know how I did that. That's more like it. Thank you very much. Okay. So I've got the Kleenex ready, and I'm going to bunch it up. Because as this dries, I'm going to put paint on the sky. As it dries, I'm going to lift it up. Now, I'm using Thalo Blue, which is a staining paint, right? But staining paints, if you can get to them at the right time, they lift beautifully. So I'm going to wet the entire sky, because the first thing that I'm going to do is create a wash. And it's a gradiated wash, and on this size painting, it's quite simple to do. So I've got the water on, and I want to be sure that the water is even on the painting. So I'll just tilt it, and if I see any pools or puddles in the reflections, I will either smooth them out or lift them out, okay? So next, fill my brush with Thalo Blue, and it can be pretty, not hugely intense, but pretty intense color, and just go back and forth. Now the reason you want to go back and forth is because you don't want to stop at one end, because if you lift your brush, it adds a lot of paint right there, and that'll start flowing down. So just back and forth, and notice that on this side's painting, I do not need any more paint. Come down to the bottom and make sure that where the paper is dry, I don't go over that, because that will stop the paint. Isn't that great? I don't even have to worry about it. Okay, just be sure that there's no little dry spots. And that's that for that. Now then, I'll take the Kleenex, bunch it up in sort of like a little cloud formation, and just drop it down on the paint. Hold it for a minute so that it lifts it up completely, and it'll give me a cloud formation. And let's just put another one in here. And if you see that you don't really like, well, see the two look pretty much the same, you can just go back in and add more, as long as it's at this stage. Now the other thing you can do right here is make sure that your brush is fairly dry, and come along and you can actually lift, and I will be twisting the brush here, some of the paint, so that it looks like there's these little striations across. There it goes. All right, and now my clouds are done. Next is the ocean, and the ocean I like to do a little bit differently. I actually like to brush across rather than doing a wash. And so what I'll do is I will come in first with Thalo Blue, and I don't want to touch that, because if I do, it'll create a blossom coming up. So I need to leave a little bit of dry paper there. And I'll come across, and you'll see, can you see here where, I'll fix this later. Can you see where the wax crayon was? So I'm just coming across here, and now I'm just going to switch to a little bit of French ultramarine blue, and the reason is because it's a little bit warmer. And I'm not going to do this evenly, just across occasionally, and by using a brush stroke and then letting the water move the paint up, it gives it more of a watery look to me. So I'll come down here and then back to Thalo Blue, because as it comes forward now, there's sand under here, and water is transparent, right? So I'm going to wet this down with Thalo Blue. And what's nice is that if it stays wet, you can just be as messy as you want to be. You don't have to get it right the first time. And then I like to add a little bit of raw sienna up front here. And the reason that I do is because water is transparent. And so what this represents is that it's the sand underneath. Notice now as this is going on, you see how, because I added more water here with the French ultramarine blue, this water is pushing up and it looks like it's splashing. Isn't that fantastic? And I don't even have to worry about doing that. This part here, I'm thinking, I wish I had put a little bit more wax crayon here. So I'm just going to lift some of this up so that it's not quite so intense in the back. And it looks like it is reflecting the island. All right, I'm going to let that dry for a while. For the sand, I'm going to add a little raw umber mixed with raw sienna, and probably heavy on the raw sienna, although I do want to be able to drop in a very heavy amount of raw umber in one of the spots, which I will mix with ultramarine blue. I want this to be a fairly dark amount of raw umber here, because this is going to end up being the shadow. Now remember, again, I said that I like to get things done in advance. Okay, so we're going to do the sand next, and this is going to be wet on wet again. So I will just wet the entire sand under the boat, avoiding the boat. And then lace a very light amount of raw sienna in here, and then a heavier amount down below. And now I'm going to let that dry somewhat, because I want to add a thick amount of paint, quite thick, right here. This is what I'm after, right down here. So I want that to dry somewhat so that it will not move really fast. And I'll use a smaller brush for this. Okay, this area in the sand has dried somewhat. So I'm going to add a little bit of raw sienna, burnt sienna on the edges, just to warm it up a little bit and give it a little bit more interest. And then dry my brush, make sure the water is out of the brush so that it's all paint, and make sure that it's not too much paint. And I'm just going to drop this right by where the boat is and let the water diffuse so that it looks like it's a rough edge there, right? If it looks too wimpy right at the edge, get some real thick paint and put it up next to it and let that diffuse. And conversely, if it has the paint that you put down wasn't thick enough so that it's moving way too far, take your brush and just simply roll it back up again Let it know who's boss. And let's just put some more paint down here and let this paint do our work for us by pushing it back up, which it will. I'm adding a little bit of water in here. See how that's working? And now I have a very interesting sandy bottom, or sand under the bottom of the boat. So what I've done, just to recap down here, I put the raw sienna down first. Then I put some burnt sienna down just to warm it up, and actually to thicken or to accentuate this corner, right? Then I put a thick amount of paint of raw umber under here, and it should have been thicker, and I should have waited a little bit longer for it to dry so it wouldn't diffuse as fast as it did. Because it diffused as fast as it did, I used a dry, fairly dry brush and rolled it up using all the bristles of the brush to make sure that it would move back up where it belonged. And then I used a combination of burnt sienna and water to push it even further. At this point, I could do that again just to show you. If I put water, just clear water down here, do you see how it's pushing up the paint, pushing it away? Now I'm going to have to play with it down here because it's also pushing it down. But see how it's pushing that paint up? I don't have to really do it myself. Okay, now, again, it is pushing it down. So let me get some paint down here and push that part back up again. So two things happen to push paint. One is water will push some paint one way or the other. It's called a blossom. Some people hate it. I absolutely adore it. And the other, water, and the other is wet paint. And the third thing, especially, is paint that has yellow in it. The yellow will really push it up. So let's see how that all dries. That's kind of fun. I like that. All right. Next, we'll do the island in the back. And because the sun is supposedly coming from behind the island will be darker toward the bottom. And so we'll make sure that that happens. And we'll start with raw sienna. And just give it a go. Notice that I've got my brush up and then I push it down. Up, push it down. Because depending on whether you have the brush up like this and with a high point, or you're pushing it down against the paper, if you push it down, you'll get some of that those white marks there, which I really do like. Now down in here, it's darker. So I'll use burnt sienna, which is a darker paint, just down in here. And maybe this one will be even darker with raw umber. The shore, I will definitely darken. Always leaving some little bits of white, right? And then from there, I'll use sap green. This is Daniel Smith's sap green. I like this one because it's easy to mix things into. Some people mix all their greens. I prefer to have just a mother color to start. And then holding my brush up high, I'll just start creating some pine trees. Not very, you don't want them to be extremely defined. And that might be a little bit more defined than you like. Now, this color in the distance is a little bit too spring color, right? So I'll just add some darker color and just drop it in to where I have put that. And this is a little bit too much, so another use for my Kleenex is if I put a straight line across here like this, drop it down, it'll lift it because it's drying the paper. So I'm going to let that dry like that. And then I will fix that little bit there. And nothing has to be completely green. I will add some green to this. But this island doesn't get much water, right? So we'll just pretend like it's not entirely healthy island. And you notice that as I'm going along, I'm darkening it even more just because I noticed that it's just a little bit too light in the back for the sun to be hitting it from behind. And over here, and you notice this is turning out to be different. That's okay. I like it that way because it's all about intuition. Let's just put a real scraggly tree there and forget about the palm trees. Again, your choice, of course, your painting. Everybody always says it. Oh, that's your choice. Well, of course it is. Going to add a little bit more interest just for fun. All right, now while that's drying, and I believe this is, nope, it wasn't close to drying. This is why I paint top to bottom, because I have just touched that. It's probably on my shirt. And although it sort of looks like a plant, so I'm going to leave it, but I wish it weren't there. Okay, so now we're going to do the little planks on the boat. These are real thin back here, and then they get thicker up front. Thin down here, thicker up front. Then down here, those are supposedly in the sand. All right. Remember, this part is where the sun is not shining, so it's darker. And I'm going to use a combination of paints. But I want the planks to show up, so I'll paint every other plank to start. And I'll start with sort of a mother color, right? Meaning local color, probably. And just paint the first one. And this one should probably be the darkest one. So why don't I add a little bit of paint here and there to it? You notice I painted the whole thing first, and then I'm adding other colors to it. It's called charging, and I love the effect. Same thing here. Okay, and now I'll paint the one below it, or two below it, like that. Leave a little bit of white right there, and then another one below that. Let it dry, and then I will paint in between. Right now, because this isn't touching anything that's wet, I can go ahead and paint this back part. where the sun isn't hitting it. It's like the little seat. And I will leave a little bit of white there, fill that in later. But it fixes it so it doesn't bleed together. There we go. Now I do have to let this dry. So now we'll finish up our little boat by painting in between the two boards that we have already painted. Maybe add a little bit more color just for the heck of it. It is watercolor after all. And do the bottom here. And maybe really get dark down here. Little red touch is always nice. And then let's just tie the boat up to something. We don't know what it's tied up to. And we're done.